Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of SimpliFlying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. Welcome to the 80th episode of Sustainability in the Air. Exactly 2 years ago, on Earth Day 2022, we launched the first episode of this podcast. My first guest was none other than Tony Douglas, the former CEO of Etihad Airways, who was followed by Scott Kirby, the CEO of United. Since then, we have had tons and tons of airline CEOs, airport CEOs, technology entrepreneurs, and even climate activists on this show. Thank you, all of you, for listening, downloading, sharing, and all the support that you've given for this podcast. Today is a special episode. Today, we launch SimpliFlying's first annual Sustainability Outlook Report. Sustainable Aviation Outlook Report, I should clarify. Now, I might say that this is the first Sustainable Aviation Outlook Report we're launching, but SimpliFlying has been around for 16 years. And for almost 10 years, we launched an annual Social Media Outlook Report back in the days when we used to also lead digital marketing and digital strategy for airlines. And that became the North Star for the aviation industry on where digital is heading, how it's being used for marketing. And that is the goal we have with this report as well. There's a lot of noise when it comes to sustainable aviation. Where is the signal? What exactly is happening? So we surveyed some of the best airlines, the top airlines making progress on sustainable aviation globally. We added data from top providers like Cirium and Envest to create a holistic picture of where is sustainable aviation today and where is it heading. With me, I've got a special guest today, Shubhadeep Pal, SimpliFlying's Chief Operating Officer and the author of this report, as well as Dirk Singer, SimpliFlying's Head of Sustainability and my co-author in the book Sustainability in the Air. Welcome, Shubhadeep and Dirk. Why don't we start, Shubhadeep, with you to tell us a little bit about the report?
Thank you, Shashank. On the second anniversary, I actually want to take a step back first before I delve into the report. Till now, I believe SimpliFlying and the podcast has been talking to believers in the space of climate change, the climate crisis. I come from a particular space of annoyance today because in recent times, I have seen a growing chorus of internet warriors who have been playing around with a lot of data, who, grabbed data from somewhere and said, oh, look, but in the UK, for instance, the temperatures have always fluctuated for the last 100 years. So what's the big deal about climate change? Temperatures are fluctuating again. And is climate change even real? So I actually want to expand our reach today by talking to some of those who are skeptical about climate change and start from the basics and say why we actually believe in climate change, why it's important, and why the work that we're doing really matters. So just a couple of things. And this is my really heartfelt outreach to those who want to say, but climate change can wait, 1.5 degrees, Paris Agreement, 2 degrees. How does it really matter? Do we really care whether net zero is reached in 2050? Do we really care whether it's 2060 or 2070? Eventually, we'll, of course, get there. We understand, it has to be done. But no, I think it's important to realize what we're talking about. It's important to parse data in the right way. And the New York Times actually has a brilliant page that talks about this at the very basic level. And there's a beautiful line that goes, weather is like your mood, the climate is like your personality. And that's where most people actually do not understand the science of climate change, because the climate is actually measured over at least a period of 30 years. The weather is daily fluctuations, monthly fluctuations that happen. So in the short term, such fluctuations don't really matter. But what's happening to the earth right now is that long-term changes are happening to its climate, and it's the long-term damage that people are talking about. People are not talking about that one hot summer day in which the temperature exceeds, say, 125 degree Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius. People are talking about consistently increasing temperatures across the world. Last year, for instance, was the first year in recorded history that, on average, the Earth's temperature was 1.5 degrees Celsius above norm, above pre industrial levels for the entire year. That has never happened before in our history. And if you want further proof of how it's damaging us, how it's impacting us, you only need to look at the wildfires that have been happening in Greece, in Australia, in Canada, in California. You have to see what's already happening with melting ice, damage to coral reefs, so on and so forth. And if you're in aviation, you really have to look at the data and say, look, climate change is affecting us because even something as simple as basic as turbulence is increasing. That's how much of an impact climate change is making. That's why it's important to start the work today, because just as the climate has not changed in one day, in 1 year, in 10 years, just as the climate has changed over decades, the work of reverting it to some kind of normalcy will also take decades, and the work has to start today. And that's why we're passionate about this. And that's why, if you don't believe in climate science, I urge you to come over to our side and to start believing in the science and to start the journey towards net zero, because it's important.
Thank you, Shub, for the introduction on why we are doing this. It's important to, you're right, elevate the conversation. This is not just about daily mood changes. This is way beyond that. The weather versus the climate, and I think it's for everyone to see. It was Frankfurt last year, and it's Dubai today. We have seen what happens at airports, and it wreaks havoc within the industry when big climate change events occur, and that has an impact. So, what can you tell us about the report and some of the key insights we've had from here?
The very basic need for this report arose not because there aren't net zero pathways in the industry, not because the industry doesn't know how to get to net zero. There are numerous pathways out there. There are numerous published reports out there. What we want to do is take a look at it from the airline side, because that's where our experience lies. In the last 15 years, we've worked with over 120 airlines. We know how the industry thinks, breathes, lives, and we want to make a difference where it matters. So what we said is, look, we understand that everyone in the aviation knows the basic facts, right? That's how I actually start my introduction, Shashank. I say, I don't need to repeat the facts to the industry. The industry knows that it's hard to abate. The industry knows the impact it has. 3% of global aviation emissions, which will increase to almost 25% by 2050. These are all facts we know. We also know, for instance, that currently the only available pathway is SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which is currently available and the most available method for airlines to start decarbonizing. Now, in this scenario, airlines find them in a curious position. Some have to face mandates from next year in terms of SAF, say in the EU, with the Refuel EU mandate. Some don't have mandates, so they're not really sure what to do. Most are in a situation where they believe that investing in sustainability will increase costs for the customer and thereby increase their operational costs and cost of business. Some are afraid that somehow sustainability will bankrupt them. So these are all these concerns and fears in the industry right now, which we wanted to address with this report. So what we are saying with this report, by surveying a select group of 20 airlines, which are at various stages, but we would say from intermediate to advanced levels of sustainable aviation action in the industry, we want to do something very simple. We want to say 5 key things. One is that the industry needs to cooperate and not compete when it comes to sustainability, because we are better together in sharing these learnings, in understanding how all of us together can, in a way, increase the pie. Because sustainability is not, when one airline becomes net zero, the entire industry has to go net zero. Second, we want to learn from other airlines in terms of what's possible, what's being done, the ways in it's being done. For instance, what are the team structures like? What is the strategy like? What are you doing in terms of budget and future outlook? What's overall your sustainability play looking like? It's very useful for airlines setting out right now to learn from these airlines. The third thing is to accept that They may not be immediate solutions, but they definitely are incremental solutions that are available right now, today, that airlines can invest in and start decarbonizing. The fourth, obviously, is that the work needs to start. We can't wait any longer. Many airlines don't have published net zero roadmaps yet. I think we're at a stage where that's probably no longer acceptable. And lastly, this report attempts to also give you a macro perspective on where the industry stands in terms of emissions, in terms of, say, if you're interested in what the most highly carbon intensive routes are, you can get to know that from this report as well. So I think it has a wealth of information and knowledge gleaned from the industry that would be interesting for anyone in this industry.
Now, the interesting thing is when Dirk and I were writing the book Sustainability in the Air, we spent almost a year researching multiple airlines, researching multiple airports. And we realized that we have to look beyond the industry for innovators. And Dirk, we struggled a bit to find a large number of airlines with solid plans, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the book, we have a number of examples, like like JetBlue, for example. And I know that that Embraer isn't an airline as such. They're a they're an aircraft manufacturer, but but in the book we profiled them as an insider who are making strides to their Energia hydrogen electric aircraft program, and also obviously through the Eve Beetles. But you're right. I mean, sort of disruption comes from the outside, and I remember that it's something that came through in interviews with Val Miftakov, who's obviously the CEO of ZeroAvia. They're a company based in the UK and the US. They're in the Time magazine's top clean tech companies in the USA, actually. And they're trying to retrofit regional aircraft to work with hydrogen electric power planes. So taking the ATRs, the Dash 8s of this world, and swapping out the fossil fuel engine with a hydrogen electric engine that obviously it makes them, not only net zero and true zero. And Val came from, Shashank, you'll remember this, having interviewed him, from an electric, from the electric car industry. And he said that from working in this industry, the lesson that he learned was, from the days of, if you look at Tesla, was that innovation is driven by outsiders. I remember that there's a quote that he gave in one of his podcasts where he said, well, in the days before Tesla came around, the sort of the legacy companies, they had a bunch of engineers who worked in these projects, and they were really there for PR purposes. And it's really only when someone came from the outside and started disrupting things that the likes of, Volkswagen and General Motors and all the other major car companies started getting into the act and started producing, their own electric vehicles to compete with the Teslas of this world. And, to a certain extent, we'll be seeing that in the aviation industry as well, that the outsiders will make the running, and that very, very soon the insiders will co-opt them, and in some cases buy them as well.
Exactly. I think there's going to be significant progress coming from outside the industry, which then helps catalyze the efforts from within the industry. Shubhadeep, when we look at what we've learned from our surveys and the data we've collected, what is the current state of the industry?
I want to answer this in one single word. I think the current state of the industry is fragmented, for lack of a better word, which is really, really, I mean, in some ways, now that I've said it, it seems that it's so true, because in our analysis and in our survey of the data that we've come up with, we realize that airlines are really disparate in the ways that they are treating sustainability. For instance, if you let's just pick up one of the first sections in the report, right, and where we talk about team structures. The truth is, airlines are investing in sustainability. They have set up sustainability teams, but they're varying in terms of how they're looking at it. For instance, a key insight that we gained was that airlines have dedicated teams, but the model that they're working with, almost 4 out of every 5 airlines are in our survey, at least, have hybrid teams. What this means is that they're not necessarily hiring people to say, you will work in sustainability. What they're doing is that they're drawing from various functions. They're also hiring dedicated sustainability people, because what they're beginning to realize, importantly, is that sustainability is not work that happens in a single siloed function. Sustainability affects all aspects of the airline, whether it is your operations, whether it is how you ground handling, whether it is your actual HQ, and of course fuel procurement, right? Because that's a key component that we'll talk about a bit more later when we talk about sustainable aviation fuel. Uh, Overall, when we talk about fragmented, it's also fragmented because airlines are taking different approaches to sustainability, and there is no real consensus on how to do it. For instance, just about half the airlines we surveyed have a chief sustainability officer, which is, I would say, they're overdue to have a sustainability officer right now, because the ICAO IATA mandate for 2050 net zero was announced a couple of years ago at least, and it's something that airlines have committed to in principle. So by now, you would expect most airlines to have taken sustainability more seriously, which also is an interesting insight from our report, because while only about half of these airlines have a chief sustainability officer, around 60-70% say that ideally they do want to have a chief sustainability officer in place to lead that function. So it's not as if airlines don't recognize it, it's just that they're somehow lagging behind the curve when it comes between theory and practice, so to speak. And this comes up again and again in many ways. For instance, just slightly, if I can digress from our report, I'm not sure if you guys have come across IATA's recently released report. I think it came out yesterday. It was a comparative study of 14 net zero roadmaps in the industry, which compares, say, IATA, ICAO, various organizations. And the first insight of that comparative study is that there is no consensus in the industry. That is literally the first insight, that there is no consensus. The only consensus is that sustainable aviation fuel is likely to contribute between 50 to 70% of carbon reduction by 2050. That is literally the only thing. Apart from that, the industry agrees on nothing. Even in terms of measurements, there are different modalities of measurements, different baselines that the industry is working with. And I think that's the one thing when I talk about fragmented. I think the industry, first of all, needs to put its head together and coordinate to say that we will use a single baseline, we will use a single measurement method, we will use a single agreed upon kind of net zero roadmap, which is, of course, modified per airline. But in general, I think it will be very hard to decarbonize when the industry itself within is so fragmented in approaches, in understanding and analysis of the goal.
This is interesting, Dirk. Given the fragmentation, whose role do you think, who's well suited to drive that joint vision for the industry, even though it may not be legally binding?
Well, let me sort of come back to the point about the fragmentation and the sort of and the and the reports that the different forecasts that Shubhadeep mentions. Includes the ICCT, the International Council of Clean Transportation, and I know obviously you've had Dan on the podcast, Dan Rutherford from the ICCT twice now, and the ICCT hasn't only published one forecast; they published four. Four different scenarios ranging from business as usual to what they call breakthrough, and breakthrough being as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. So, not just kind of that reinforces the point of Shubhadeep was making. There's so many variables in this. We're 26 years away from the theoretical industry net zero target by 2050. And there's a number of different roads now in which we can go down. And obviously what the ICCT found is the ICCT released those forecasts in 2022. They went back to it recently and found that sort of the 2 years on, that the industry is on the second least ambitious pathways. They're just one step up from doing nothing. Is where they are right now. And yes, I mean there has to be standardization. I guess there's on the outside there might be a certain amount of skepticism about this business, but us marking our own homework, so industry bodies, releasing our own targets and our own forecasts, which is why I personally always, refer to bodies like the ICCT, because they are credible third parties who understand the industry, who don't have any sort of vested interests, one way or the other into this.
Shubhadeep, you also mentioned the point about chief sustainability officers. You mentioned chief sustainability officer. Now, I was having a chat with an airline executive just this week, and he said, Shashank, forget about chief sustainability officer who we are trying to hire for the last 2.5 years. They've not found someone in their country who meets the criteria, who has worked at senior levels of sustainable aviation. Forget about that. They have not even found someone who's worked in sustainability, who's willing to switch over to aviation, because it's a hard job. He said that we are trying to hire a sustainability manager in one of our airline offices, and we can't even find a person for that. What did we learn about team structures in our survey, and what can airlines glean from that?
I mean, in terms of team structure, as I said, hybrid teams are still reigning supreme, by which, it combines a dedicated team with staff distributed from other functions. Many of these, at least half of the airlines, around half of the airlines we surveyed, don't work with, say, a chief sustainability officer, and they have various different heads who run it. Some report to, say, an operations manager or COO. Some report to the CEO. So it's really fragmented in that sense. But here's the good news. I mean, finally, there was bound to be some good news, right? Uh, the good news is that staffing is actually increasing, which is a positive sign for the industry, which means that the airlines are not really resting on, they're not being complacent. And I know personally we have, a tendency to be harsh on airlines, saying, there's not much movement, not much is being done. But I don't personally think that's true. I think there are a number of airlines that are trying various levers, and they're trying their best to, okay, best is a strong term, but they are trying to do what they can in the sustainability sphere. For instance, here's let me bring up some statistics. It is very, very striking and very, very heartening that around 60% of the airlines we surveyed have more than 10 full-time staff focused exclusively on sustainability, which is which of course could be a selection bias, because we did select a number of airlines who are at various stages of sustainability and journey. But even so, a 10-person team is quite large for any airline. I've personally worked with an airline for over 2 years, and I know how small and concentrated teams can be in airlines, and how crushed for bandwidth they can be. So personally, I think it is extremely encouraging that airlines are investing in teams, especially large ones where possible, because they know that the journey is going to be complex. It will need various specializations. And I think that's what's happening. People of various specializations are coming into a single team, which is why the sizes of these teams are increasing. What, however, is important from a team perspective is that, you know, it's important to have a team, but there can be a tendency to just get complacent after a team grows to, say, a 15-20 member team, and you start thinking that, oh, our achievement is having a big team. And but that's not really true. People are laying the foundation for the work that has to be done in sustainability. But let us not forget skills and budget. And by skills, I want to connect to what you were talking about hiring the right people, finding the skills, finding people who are trained in sustainability, and also who can match their sustainability skills with the skills that are required in an airline, and understand how an airline operates. Because often the challenge is that someone from pure sustainability background will come and say, uh, should we shut down the airline? That's not how an airline is going to operate, right? That's not, we can't blindly bring in someone who doesn't understand the business, and we can't get someone who does not have any backing at all, any background at all in sustainability. So that's a key thing that we need to do: skill development. And second, let's not forget budget. It's good to have a 10-person team, but do they have the mandate? Do they have a sizable budget to invest in sustainability initiatives? That's a question that we want to ask.
Well, talking about budgets, we did ask them about budgets, isn't it? Are the budgets increasing, decreasing? Are we seeing, sustainability heads trying to convince the CFOs? Are they succeeding?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that budgets have been increasing significantly in the last few years. Most airlines are pretty much on board. A majority have seen a significant increase in budget. Others have seen a moderate increase in budget, but no one really said that budgets have stayed the same or have fallen. So that's really great. It means that it's being taken seriously. That being said, I do want to point out a couple of interesting findings from the budget and future outlook section of our report, uh, which talks about not just budget, but it talks about what exactly, when it comes to, say, investment, what exactly when it comes to, say, budget, etc. What are the challenges that airlines are facing? And right now, not surprisingly, high costs are the number one cited challenge when it comes to making actual investments or budget allocation. So by high costs, we mean high costs of investing in sustainability solutions. For instance, SAF, as you know, is 3 to 5 times more expensive than jet air fuel. The second is technological limitations. 90% of airlines say that technological limitations are impeding their progress. For instance, electric and hydrogen aircraft are not yet prime time ready, will not be for at least a decade, if not more. What this means is that the industry's thin margins are making it very difficult for them to absorb the premium for SAF and other green technologies. In which case, of course, we have certain recommendations, and our report is not purely numbers. Our report surveys a lot of findings, and then we have some concrete recommendations for airlines as well on how to approach certain challenges. For instance, in our budget section, what we do talk about is what might help airlines, again, in a fragmented space. What might help is more collaboration. For instance, Shashank, and probably you can talk a little bit about this after I'm done. We have been closely associated with SkyTeam's the Sustainable Flight Challenge, and that's a great forum for industry-wide collaboration. Right now, of course, it's SkyTeam members, but because cost is such a universal barrier to scaling, sustainable technologies, airlines really need to work together with, the partners to build economies of scale, to increase investment, reduce prices. Some of the ideas, we suggest are joint offtake agreements or shared infrastructure investments. In some way, the industry and the airlines in the industry need to realize that it's a joint problem. And for a joint problem, we need joint solutions. It's not as if one airline grabbing all the SAF in the world is going to suddenly become the best airline in the world or going to help the industry. All of the industry needs to move forward for us to actually achieve anything.
I think collaboration is where it's at. Doug, in your opinion, who do you think is collaborating well in the industry?
Well, I mean, Shubhadeep just mentioned SkyTeam in the Sustainable Flight Challenge, and of course, we have a whole chapter in the book about the Sustainable Flight Challenge, and it's an excellent example of sort of 20 odd sort of airlines coming together, and it's for those that aren't familiar, it's an annual. I think competition is the wrong word. It's an annual challenge where SkyTeam member airlines, try and see. They take a series of flights, over a series of days, and they try to push the envelope, in terms of how they can, push the sustainability boundaries. In everything from passenger education to on board, to obviously to reducing fuel burn and reducing carbon emissions. And of course, as you know, because obviously Shank, you speak to them about this quite a lot, is a major feature of the SkyTeam Sustainable Flight Challenge is knowledge sharing and collaboration. So that all knowledge should be open source. And if we're talking about open source, another example is that the work that that Delta has done with MIT on Contrail. Delta was obviously in MIT were also very, very keen the fact that that the research that comes of that, the findings that come from that, should be open source, because obviously contrails, contrail avoidance, it's an industry issue. And that's a great example of that. Then, of course, United Airlines has come together with a number of other airlines and on a SAF purchase consortium. I believe the likes of JetBlue and Hawaiian Airlines, a number of others are involved in that. So we're starting to see more movement towards what Shubhadeep mentions, that we have to work collectively, rather than striking out, sort of one by one and individually.
I do want to. Sorry, Shashank. I just wanted to butt in here because Dirk has written and he's talked about the investment, the kind of investment that's required in the industry right now, and we were in our current sort of budget and future outlook section when we're talking about it. And I do want Dirk to share a few thoughts about he's written a number of times about the huge investment gap that exists in the industry, how only a few companies really receive funding, how it's so hard for companies to make it out of the initial struggle to become relevant. So what are the key challenges when it comes to if you could talk about the investment challenges, the funding challenge, the gap that exists in the industry?
So let's sort of start on a positive. And there's a lot of investors, a lot of VCs do believe that climate tech is the investment opportunity, of our times. And I think that as well. There's a very well-known climate tech venture capitalist, Sean O'Sullivan of Sean O'Sullivan Ventures, who talks about 500 unicorns being created in this space. And he says that they have to be, because essentially what we're doing is we're having to transform whole industries. So completely new companies are going to have to be created to meet those needs. And we profile some of them in the book. But it is correct that that Shubhadeep's right in saying that there's a large gap between the aspiration and the reality. Some of the stats that have been sort of thrown about say that only 16% of wider climate tech needs are being met, which means that obviously that 84% are not. And we published an article on the Hub the other week where we spoke to Deal Room, who do venture capitalists and finance intelligence. Where I was surprised to learn. I actually thought it was more than this. There are only five aviation companies outside of the eVTOL, so outside of the electric air taxis, that have raised over $100 million in venture capital funding. And those five companies are Hart Aerospace, which is obviously doing hybrid electric aircraft; Zero Avia, the hydrogen electric powertrain maker, both those being in a book; Eviation, who are making electric aircraft; at Surf Air, which is a kind of electric aircraft marketplace. Then there's Flying Whales, which is a sort of a cargo blimp company. And apparently, Universal Hydrogen, another hydrogen electric aircraft company, isn't that far behind. Now, as we know, there are hundreds of companies in this space that are trying to raise money, that have great ideas. And to create a new aircraft, or even to build a new sat plant, is incredibly capital intensive. I mean, the figure that's often bandied about is for a new plant, $300 to $500 million plus, sometimes $1 billion, and for a new clean sheet aircraft, $1 billion plus. Though I believe that there's some companies that no, Shashank spoke to Elysium, who are trying to develop a new electric aircraft. They're actually talking about $5 billion plus. They're saying $1 billion is an underestimate, and we're going to need a lot more than that. So, we are not very, very far down the road, of this technology being funded. However, we can see that some do succeed. That the ones that succeed are the ones that involve customers very, very early on. Zero Avia's managed to do that instead of working with the OEMs. Embraer with their new, I know that they're not a startup, but they provide a good model in terms of having the customer advisory boards and having the customer shape what the end product will be. Hart Aerospace does that. Hart Aerospace has customer advisory boards. Hart Aerospace has airports and airlines on board who are feeding into the final design. So they get the customer involved at an early stage. They're also very, very good at at addressing a need. So Hart Aerospace, as Anders Forstone, the CEO of Hart Aerospace, he has this slide that he put up to conferences where he shows the number of airports in the US that in the 1990s used to have regional air services that no longer have it. And of course, electric aircraft, it's not only a decarbonization solution, it is a way to bring back regional connectivity. Because electric aircraft are, of course, cheaper to operate. There's no noise pollution and, of course, no actual pollution compared to their fossil fuel counterparts. So he manages to tell stories like that. So the being able to create a winning proposition, being able to address a need, having a clear purpose, involving the customer in an early stage. All of these things are key ingredients for the ones that the few that are on the road to commercialization, compared to the hundreds of companies which have great ideas, which have nothing more than a PowerPoint deck.
I think this is another full episode of this podcast that we can record around scaling technologies and the funding. But going back to the report, I know we have some very specific insights, not just around the sustainability strategy of airlines, but how they're communicating about these strategies, how they're trying to build trust among customers, employees, and stakeholders beyond those as well. What have we learned?
I think the biggest learning, obviously, is that airlines are now very scared of greenwashing. And I'm going to pull in Dirk in a bit, because Dirk's been our in-house specialist on greenwashing, and he knows so much about it. I'm sure he has something fun to add to this conversation in a bit. But primarily, I think that's one of the major insights, is that airlines are beginning to recognize how dangerous, in a way, greenwashing is. whether it's in terms of legal troubles that they can get into, whether it's loss of consumer confidence, whether it's in actual ethical concerns that airlines might have in terms of not talking about stuff that's not happening, uh, or whether it's about facing climate activist backlash in terms of putting something out there just for the sake of marketing. That's one key insight where airlines significantly majority say that they do really think about the communications before communicating, because greenwashing is a significant concern on their minds. Apart from that, it is heartening to note that most airlines are in fact investing in communicating with most of their key stakeholders when it comes to sustainability, especially their employees, whether it's in terms of training programs, whether it's in terms of seminars, workshops. But most interestingly, and this was a result I did not expect, is that a number of airlines are saying that they're open, willing, and actually engaging with climate groups and NGOs and activists, which I think is something that the industry should be lauded for if it's truly happening. And it needs to happen more for the industry to also get the outside perspective of how their actions are viewed. And it is heartening that the industry realizes that such open dialogue is essential to move the industry forward and to not, Shashank, we've had a couple of brilliant guests on our own podcasts who are, staunch climate believers and activists. And maybe you could give a sort of brief about the couple of guests we've had. But I think it really helps when you listen to alternative points of view, because the industry sometimes wants to make it appear as if climate activists are just rabid scaremongers or something like that, whereas that's not true. When you speak to a lot of these people, many of them are perfectly reasonable people who care about the climate, who care about the planet. And it sometimes is important for us to get that outside view for us to be able to progress. And I would say, of all the insights from that section, I was the happiest and I was most surprised by this insight, where airlines are showing an increasing willingness to work with NGOs, nonprofits, and climate activists.
I think that's just to build on Shibi's point. I mean, so one of the sort of the important things to note about the climate movement is that, there's this stereotype that a climate activist is automatically someone who like blocks motorways, or who throws cans of soup at oil paintings. Actually, it is not a homogenous group. I mean, obviously they have a they have a general goal, in terms of pushing industries, in terms of pushing governments towards net zero, but the tactics and approaches and perspectives vary a lot. And I think that's one very, very important thing to bear in mind. And, as Shubhadeep says, Shashank, I know some of the guests you've had in your program, I mean, aviation executives might disagree with them, but they are, they're they make their points in a very reasonable and civil and well-educated way. And there is a scope for, for more dialogue that goes beyond, these sort of settings where an airline CEO, an airline representative is pitted against, someone in an NGO in a debate setting. In front of the media or in front of the university, what have you, because that is immediately confrontational. And there's a scope to take that beyond, into more conducive and more constructive, forum.
I think it's so important, right? Communicating right. You build trust or you lose trust. It's not about not saying anything. That's green hushing, and we are doing a disservice to the industry because even the good efforts are not being communicated. Yes, I'm with airline executives when it comes to taking caution and ensuring that you're only talking about what you're doing, and not just putting out one-liner billboards, but detailed stories about exactly what's happening and why it's happening and how it's impacting lives and changing the way we travel. I think it is important to communicate. I believe that in what I've seen, the industry has been playing defense when it comes to communications, and I'm glad to see it's changing, both in terms of investment as well as how the stuff is being, the sustainability efforts are being communicated. It's so important not to fall into the trap of green hushing. Final bit, Shubhadeep, we of course talked about budgets and future outlook. Um, I remember going through the report, and there was a statistic that 70% of the airlines that we surveyed are investing or looking to invest in sustainable aviation fuel companies. Let's talk about SAF for a little bit. Is that the silver bullet
Yeah.
that it seems to be right now?
Yeah, I was going to say we should come to SAF, but before that, can I just make a small digression based on our discussions on communications? I have a very small gripe with airlines when it comes to communications, and I'll tell you why. Uh, if you were not an industry observer, either of you can answer this question as non-industry observers. When is the first electric flight expected to happen? Just generally, just give me a date, because I'm going to make a bit larger point about this. Air New Zealand announced this. It just went out in our newsletter today, by the way.
I guess it depends on your definition of electric flight, because of course we have electric aircraft and we have vehicles as well.
So Dirk is basically getting the point I was trying to make. So there are a couple of announcements that came up this week. They were major announcements, and of course we're happy as an industry that things are moving. The first announcement that came out this week was EasyJet has conducted UK's first airside hydrogen trial at Bristol Airport. That's headline one. Headline two is Air New Zealand announced that the first electric flights will be between Wellington and I can't recall the. Let me just quickly check this. They said it will be in 2026 that they'll have their first electric flight. Now, their electric flight will be held on Beta's Aria aircraft. If you look into the nuances of this, for EasyJet, everyone knows that the earliest hydrogen flight that's probably going to happen is maybe 2026, 27, where maybe it's a retrofitted 19-seater or 40-seater that will take off. Most likely zero Avia's aircraft. When it comes to electric aircraft, it's going to be a 5-seater Beta Alia aircraft, which can fly about 300 miles. I think, realistically, there is both an overexcitement regarding these technologies today and an underreporting of the realities of where these technologies stand. And to me, that's a bit of a problem because it's a mismatch in what's actually going to happen and our expectation of what's going to happen. We expect everyone to fly in an electric aircraft, whereas only 5 people or 10 people or at the most 30, 40 people will be able to fly very short distances on an electric aircraft. A commercial hydrogen airplane is not even in the works currently, and if it is, it won't be ready for prime time by even 2035, most likely, which is Airbus's date for, So do you personally feel that this is something that airlines should improve upon in terms of communications, or is it is it merely perception building? Is it PR? Do they truly believe that this is the way out? What's your experience like?
So the thing is, firstly, here's the good news. Up until this week, the first electric flight was going to be in 2028 by SAS Scandinavian on a Heart Aerospace aircraft. We have now preponed that by 2 years, thanks to Air New Zealand, which is now in 2026. So that's the good news. It's worth celebrating. Different airlines have a different propensity to communicate what they're doing, and they have different firepower. Not everyone can be a Virgin Atlantic and put Richard Branson on board their staff flight. Interestingly, the week before Virgin Atlantic's 100% staff flight, Gulfstream flew a business jet across the Atlantic on 100% staff as well. But very few people know about it. In fact, every single time I've heard a senior executive from Gulfstream talk about it, they said, "Oh, remember the Virgin flight? We did it earlier, you just didn't know about it." And that's because Gulfstream does not have Richard Branson, Virgin Atlantic does. So, to be fair to airlines, different airlines have different resources. And a bit like startups, technology CEOs that I have on the podcast very often, it is very important to put a lot of the resources in engineering and ensuring that you build a good product before you start talking about it. Similarly, airlines must invest in the effort before they can communicate about it. And I think it's a matter of time before a lot more work gets communicated in the right manner. So I don't think it's wrong, it's just apples and oranges.
I think that to a certain extent, I mean, because, I mean, Shubhadeep mentioned areas such as electric and hydrogen. I think a lot of airlines are, because we're at such an early stage, there's a bit of a sort of an attitude of, let's put bets on all of them and see what works. because as Shiv just said, we don't know when the first hydrogen electric aircraft will take off. Maybe in 2026, maybe 2037. Hydrogen commercial aircraft maybe 2035, maybe 2040. Who knows? And of course, there's a lot of different claims being made around, let's say, battery technology. I mean, as we know, last year, Tecnam and Rolls-Royce withdrew from the P-Volt project, where they're going to retrofit the small P-Volt aircraft, because they said that that it's just not worth it in terms of the batteries don't have the range, and of course they discharge too quickly. Then on the other side, you have companies that are betting very heavily on. I mean, when we spoke to Amprius, which is a US battery maker, they claimed that by the 2030s, there'd be a battery good enough to power a private jet across the Atlantic. So who's right? So so there's all these competing claims, and there's a lot of confusion. That's why I think a lot of airlines are making multiple bets. If you take someone like United, United has invested both in Heart Aerospace, which of course is making hybrid electric regional aircraft, and in Zero Avia, to have hydrogen electric powertrains that they can use to retrofit their existing aircraft. Same market, they're short United Express commuter regional routes, but they're making two bets because, they might use both simultaneously, but one may well prove to be the winner over the other.
We are nearing up to almost an hour here on the podcast. Shubhadeep, if I was to ask you, what are the three biggest key takeaways from this report, what would that be?
That's always hard to answer in a report that covers a lot of ground. I think we asked at least 45 questions in our survey, and they cover various aspects of airline operations. I know you wanted to talk a bit about SAF, so I'm just going to quickly segue into it and talk for 2 minutes about SAF, because SAF is currently considered by most airlines the most viable pathway to decarbonization. Whether you consider published net zero roadmaps by airlines, whether you consider IATA's roadmaps, most roadmaps suggest that, as I said, 50 to 70% of the reductions will be thanks to SAF. The question around SAF has always been, is there enough of it? Is it affordable? Will we get enough of it when we need it? Those questions are very hard to answer, but increasing number of investments are being made in SAF. As you all know, United has made a tremendous amount of investment in SAF. In fact, it has probably made double the amount of investment and sort of offtakes than its next highest, which is, I think, Air France KLM. But again, the fine print comes up again and again, right? These offtake agreements for most airlines are spread across 15 to 20 years of, total volumes are spread across 15 to 20 years. So it's not as if they'll get all of them in the same year or immediately. The key fact to remember is only in 2023, only 0.57% of the entire industry's jet fuel usage was SAF. That's the contribution of SAF to the overall mix, which is, it's really, really low. We don't need to say much about that. The good thing is, and I know Shashank has a very interesting anecdote about this, so I want to segue into that. The good thing is, we believe that mandates work. And the reason for that is that because SAF is expensive, many airlines will instinctively shy away from procuring SAF unless they are compelled to procure it. For instance, consider Refuel EU. We are starting with, I think, a 2% SAF uptake from 2025 January in all flights departing European airports. It goes up to, I know it goes up to about 70% in 2050, but even before that, the 2030 target is pretty decent as well. What matters right now is airlines need a combination of incentives and mandates, which we sincerely believe in order for the SAF industry to go, for their uptake to grow. And talking of mandates, Shashank, I really want to get you in and have you narrate this really interesting anecdote you told us the other day about how SAF usage has actually been decreasing for some airlines. Even if you don't want to take any names, I think let's at least have the listeners understand the reality of the industry.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about SAF, and we try to cover this, I think, in the Outlook report as well, is yes, the number of offtakes are increasing, and that's very encouraging. We have to recognize that offtakes are much cheaper to buy on a per unit basis for SAF than buying a unit of SAF today. So a lot of airlines are putting, let's say, their $1 to buy an offtake in the future than buying SAF today with that same dollar. And that's because, one, there are not enough mandates that require airlines to buy SAF today. So why would you spend 3x or 5x to buy SAF today if you're not required to? Might as well just go secure cheaper supplies for the future when you will be required to. So that's hindering a number of airlines from buying SAF today. Why would the CFO approve it if he's not required to? And fuel is already 30% of the cost. Why make it 60% of the cost or 70% of the cost just because you can? Let's put that money in buying offtakes for the future. And that's where the challenge is. The current usage of SAF is very, very, very abysmal, even though it's growing. What this also results in, I learned recently, is some SAF suppliers and producers have excess SAF today that is not sold right now, which came as a huge surprise to me, because we've all been hearing about how there's not enough SAF to go around. But today, if you go into the market, there are suppliers with excess SAF that they've produced, which is not bought yet because there aren't enough airlines buying it. And I think that is the key goal of this report. Let us put our money where our mouths are as an industry. Let us come up with a consolidated, coordinated approach, not each man on his or each woman on her own. And together, I believe we can build trust in the industry if we don't just send signals of what we are doing, but we lead by doing the right work. And through this report, we are highlighting who's doing the right work, how they're doing it, what needs to be done in the industry. And, I believe that this is the first of many annual such reports that we will launch around the state of sustainable aviation every year.
I do want to give a quick shout out to someone you wouldn't expect me to give a shout out to, which is Air France KLM. KLM, as you all know, has been in hot water recently and is really the subject of litigation. But very hearteningly, in our SAF estimates, and we actually tallied it based on 2 or 3 independent estimates, Air France KLM has been by far the biggest procurer of SAF and user of SAF over the last couple of years, which the numbers indicate. But even there, as you know, it accounts for maybe under 1% of the total fuel mix. But I did want to bring this up because it's clear that Air France KLM is responding to change, it's responding to criticism, and they're taking concrete steps to procure SAF, which is really, really heartening. I do also want to mention one more thing that got left out because we were talking about all the big picture stuff, which is that airlines should not despair that there are no magical big solutions available today. Most net zero roadmaps actually say that operational efficiencies can shave off as much as 10% of, can contribute as much as 10% to the carbon reduction goals by 2050. And those operational improvements are available today. So we would urge airlines to invest in operational efficiencies, eco-piloting measures, electrified ground equipment, recycling, investing in the circular economy, so on and so forth, because they will reap real dividends. Invest in renewable energy where possible. There are significant solutions from your aircraft manufacturers that can help you shave off as much as 600 kg of fuel per day per an A320, if I'm not wrong. There are solutions available from technology providers like Sita, which can adjust your ascent profile of an aircraft, which can shave off and save you fuel. And these are savings that are actually financially beneficial for you. So there is no reason to hold back on such measures. And I know, Shashank, you asked me for 2 or 3 key conclusions, and I do want to get to them unless you have something to add in. Okay. So just quickly, the 3 or 4 broad learnings right off the top of my head. I know this is a long report. It has been written over a long period of time, surveyed over a long period of time. So it's not really possible to summarize it in one go. And of course, this is a podcast, not an audiobook. So you should read the report in its entirety. But the 3 key takeaways for me is that, first and foremost, airlines have to resist it and invest only in perfect situations. It may take forever to arrive. They have to take the levers that are available today and do the best they can with them, whether it is SAF, whether it is operational efficiency, even if it is small electric aircraft that can fly in 2028, go for it. As Dirk said, there are multiple levers. Why hold back? Second, airlines must communicate clearly, carefully, with conscience, and incorporate elements of storytelling and avoid greenwashing, which is critical for them to build trust. And they need to build trust not just with their own employees, they need to build trust with consumers as well as climate activists in the long term. They have to convince people that A, flying is a net good for the planet, that it is important, and they have to convince everyone that those in the business of making people fly are serious about decarbonization. The third key is basically a combination of multiple takeaways, which is that decarbonization is not going to be easy. It will require an unprecedented scale of industry-wide collaboration, which means we will not get to net zero by 2050 if the industry does not cooperate, if airlines are still fragmented in the next couple of years, if there are no standards, baselines, benchmarks that the industry can work together on or agree upon, we will not get to net zero. And the last is airlines have to keep investing, learning, building teams, and expanding their budgets to incorporate the right solutions. And with that, I would say that's a wrap on 2024's Outlook, and I look forward to speaking with you on 5's Outlook.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Shubhadeep. I know this is, of course, you've written this report, but this has been a team effort. Special thanks to Lihia for the effort put into designing the report, for Dirk for your guidance on the overall approach, to Baiba for project managing this whole thing, and of course to Ayushi as well. It's been a team effort. And where can people find this report?
Of course, we'll obviously put a link in our show notes when this podcast is published. But for those looking, it will be available on our website, SimpliFlying.com, and also on our sustainability hub, which is at green.simplifying.com. So I look forward to people reading it, and do write to us if you find something interesting, if you want to, or what you would like us to change or add to next year's Outlook report. And we look forward to your comments.
And thank you once again, Shubhadeep, Dirk, for participating, and also to our partners, Cirium and Envest, for supplying us with the data, as well as all the airlines and sustainability heads who participated in the survey. Thank you very much, and we'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@SimpliFlying, that's simply with an I.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by SimpliFlying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Meera Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Lihia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of SimpliFlying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.